He's 30 and she's 60, and love brought them together. The shocking truth about their relationship will leave you amazed. Heavenly Father, we bring our heavy hearts and restless minds to you. Help us find peace in the chaos and strength when we feel weak. Remind us that we are never alone, even in our darkest moments. Teach us to trust your plan, even when we don't understand. Thank you for walking with us through every fear and doubt. My beautiful family, I want to take a moment to sincerely apologize for my last story. I understand that it fell short of your expectations, and I deeply regret disappointing you. I take full responsibility and assure you that I've heard your feedback loud and clear. I've poured my heart into delivering 100 stories that you've loved, and I never intended for one mistake to overshadow them. I promise to learn from this and do better moving forward. Your loyalty and trust mean the world to me, and I hope you can forgive me. Thank you for being my guiding light, even in tough times. I'll work harder to ensure every story brings you joy, inspiration, and value. Please stay with me on this journey. Together, we'll grow stronger. With love and gratitude, Mr. Peter. Chapter 1. An unexpected meeting. The autumn breeze whispered through Manhattan's concrete canyons, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and possibility. Jessica Lucy Armstrong stood before her art gallery, second canvas, her reflection ghosting across the pristine windows. At 60, she cut an elegant figure against the modernist facade, silver-streaked ebony hair swept into a casual chignon, her charcoal wrap dress speaking of understated sophistication. But it was her eyes that told the real story, deep brown pools that held both unspoken wisdom and carefully guarded pain. The gallery had become her sanctuary, her rebellion against grief. 3 years had passed since that rainy April morning when 2 solemn police officers appeared at her door. Their words, tragic accident, instant death, no suffering, seemed to float in the air like cruel butterflies, refusing to land and become real. James, her husband of just 23 days, had been driving to surprise her with breakfast when a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel. Just like that, her late-in-life fairy tale shattered. Jessica's fingers traced the brass nameplate beside the door, remembering the day she'd chosen the gallery's name. Second Canvas wasn't just a business. It was a statement of defiance. Life, like art, sometimes demanded a fresh start, a new surface on which to create. She'd built this place from nothing, transforming an abandoned warehouse into one of Chelsea's most respected contemporary art spaces. Her curatorial eye had launched careers, her reputation for discovering raw talent drawing collectors from across the globe. But success, she'd learned, was a poor substitute for connection. The October evening was settling in, painting the sky in watercolor washes of purple and orange. Jessica should have been heading home, her small but cherished apartment overlooking Washington Square Park, but something kept her rooted to the spot. Through the window, she could see her latest exhibition, Fragments of Time, a collection exploring memory and loss. The centerpiece was a massive installation of broken mirrors, each shard reflecting a different photograph from the artist's life. She didn't notice him at first. Antonio Joe Salvatore moved with the quiet confidence of someone accomplished enough to no longer need to prove it. At 30, he'd already built and lost an empire, though the media only knew half the story. His company, Neurotech Solutions, had revolutionized brain-computer interfaces before his ex-fiancée Marissa orchestrated its hostile takeover. The betrayal, both personal and professional, had left him wealthy but wounded, wary of combining business with pleasure ever again. He hadn't planned to visit an art gallery that evening. His intention had been drinks with investors, another tedious attempt to rebuild his business reputation, but something about the gallery's warm lights and the solitary figure standing before it called to him. Later, he would tell friends it was destiny. In truth, it was simpler than that. He recognized in Jessica's stance the same quiet resilience he saw in his own mirror each morning. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered. Jessica turned, professional smile already in place, only to have it fade into something more genuine as their eyes met. There was none of the usual awkwardness that came with such moments, no immediate awareness of their age gap, no social stumbling. Instead, there was recognition, though of what neither could yet say. "You're just in time," Jessica found herself saying, though the gallery had technically closed 10 minutes ago. "The light hits the installation perfectly at this hour." Antonio moved closer to the mirror piece, his reflection fragmenting across its surface. "It's about memory, isn't it? How we piece together our past from imperfect reflections." Jessica's eyebrows rose slightly. Most visitors saw only the technical brilliance of the piece, not its deeper meaning. "Yes, exactly. The artist, Elena Santos, lost her memory in an accident. She created this using photographs others told her were from her life, but she has no direct recollection of the moments captured." "So she's building a self from borrowed memories," Antonio mused, his hand hovering near but not touching the gleaming surface. "Like trying to understand a story by reading only torn-out pages." They fell into conversation as naturally as old friends reuniting, though they'd never met before. Jessica found herself sharing details about the artist she represented, while Antonio spoke of his work in neurotechnology and his fascination with how the brain processes memory and experience. Neither mentioned their personal losses, yet somehow both sensed the shadows the other carried. Hours slipped by unnoticed. The gallery's automatic lights dimmed and brightened as motion sensors tracked their movement from piece to piece. They discussed art, technology, philosophy, and the way New York had changed over the decades. Jessica shared stories of the city's wild art scene in the 1980s, while Antonio described his vision for merging technology with creative expression. "I'm developing an interface that would allow locked-in patients to create art using only their thoughts," he explained, his passion evident in every word. "Imagine being able to paint without physical limitations, to express yourself purely through mental imagery." Jessica leaned against her desk, fascinated. "That's extraordinary. It could revolutionize not just art therapy, but our whole understanding of creative expression." "That's the dream," Antonio said, a shadow crossing his face. Or it was before complications arose. Something in his tone resonated with Jessica's own experience of loss, making her bold. "Complications usually come dressed as people we trusted," she observed quietly. Their eyes met again, and in that moment, both recognized what they'd seen in each other earlier. The peculiar strength that comes from having your life upended and choosing to begin again. The conversation shifted then, becoming more personal, though neither shared their full stories yet. They spoke of resilience, of the courage required to remain open to possibility after disappointment. Jessica described her decision to open the gallery, while Antonio talked about his current project. A smaller, more focused venture that felt truer to his original vision. When Jessica finally glanced at her watch, she was startled to find it was nearly midnight. "I'm so sorry," she began. "I've kept you here for hours." Antonio smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "I can't think of a better way to spend an evening, though I should probably know your name by now." "Jessica Lucy Armstrong," she offered, extending her hand. "Antonio Joe Salvatore," he replied, taking it. The handshake lasted a moment longer than convention dictated, both aware of an unexpected current of connection. As they prepared to leave, Antonio paused at the door. "The gallery's closed tomorrow, isn't it?" Jessica nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of anticipation in her chest. "Would you consider having dinner with me? There's a small Italian place in the West Village. Family-owned, quiet. perfect for continuing our discussion about art and memory. The practical part of Jessica's mind, the part that had protected her since James's death, immediately noted their age difference, the potential complications, the likelihood of misunderstanding or judgment. But for once, that voice was quieter than the one reminding her that genuine connection was rare at any age. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. Standing on the sidewalk as Antonio hailed a cab for her, Jessica felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the simple thrill of possibility. She didn't know then how this evening would change both their lives, couldn't foresee the challenges and judgments they would face. She only knew that for the first time since losing James, she felt fully present in her own life. The cab pulled away, carrying her toward home through the glittering Manhattan night. In the gallery's darkened window, Antonio watched her departure, already knowing that his life had shifted on its axis, though he couldn't yet understand how profoundly. Above them, the October sky had cleared, revealing stars typically hidden by the city's lights. Neither Jessica nor Antonio noticed them, too absorbed in their own thoughts, their own surprising reactions to this unexpected encounter. But later, both would remember this night as one where the universe conspired to put them in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, proving that sometimes the heart's timing defies society's carefully constructed schedules. Their story was just beginning, and like all great love stories, it would face its share of obstacles. But in that moment, all that existed was the lingering warmth of connection and the promise of tomorrow's dinner, where two people who had learned the hard way that life offers no guarantees would take their first steps toward proving that love knows no boundaries, not of age, not of experience, and certainly not of society's expectations. The gallery stood silent now, Elena Santos's broken mirrors reflecting the empty space where an unexpected meeting had turned into something more. In their fractured surfaces, 1,000 possible futures seemed to shimmer, waiting to be discovered, proving that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings arise from life's most painful fragments. Outside, the autumn breeze continued its dance through the city streets, carrying with it the whispered possibility of new beginnings. And in two separate cabs, heading in opposite directions through the Manhattan night, two people who had stopped believing in fairy tales found themselves wondering if perhaps, just perhaps, some stories deserve a second draft. Chapter 2. Breaking Down Walls. The small Italian restaurant in the West Village, Piccolo Sogno, was exactly as Antonio had described, intimate, family-owned, and wonderfully out of step with the trendy establishments that dominated the neighborhood. Tucked away on a quiet corner of Bedford Street, its warm yellow light spilled onto the cobblestones like liquid gold, creating a haven against the crisp October night. Jessica arrived precisely on time, her heart performing an unexpected flutter when she saw Antonio already waiting outside. He'd changed from his business attire into dark jeans and a charcoal cashmere sweater that somehow made him look both more approachable and more handsome. The sight of him leaning against the weathered brick wall, completely absorbed in something on his phone, gave her a moment to compose herself. She'd spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing her outfit, settling finally on a deep burgundy silk blouse paired with black palazzo pants and her favorite vintage Cartier watch, a gift from James that she'd only recently found the strength to wear again. Her silver-streaked hair was loose tonight, falling in natural waves that softened her features. At 60, Jessica had long since made peace with her appearance, but tonight she found herself hoping she looked elegant rather than just old. Antonio noticed her approach before she could announce herself, his face lighting up with a smile that immediately eased her nerves. "Jessica," he said warmly, slipping his phone into his pocket. "I was half afraid you might change your mind." "I considered it," she admitted with surprising honesty. "Several times, actually. But something told me I'd regret not coming more than I'd regret showing up." His expression softened with understanding. "I know exactly what you mean. Shall we?" He opened the restaurant's door, releasing the scent of garlic, basil, and decades of perfectly simmered marinara sauce into the evening air. Inside, they were greeted by an elderly woman whose deeply lined face creased with genuine pleasure at the sight of Antonio. "Antonino!" she exclaimed, reaching up to pat his cheek. "Too long, too long. Your uncle would be very upset with you." "Zia Rosa," Antonio laughed, submitting to the pat with good grace. "You know that's not my name, and I was here just last month." "Bah! A month is too long." Rosa turned her sharp, dark eyes to Jessica, assessing her with the frankness of the truly elderly. Whatever she saw must have pleased her because her smile widened. "Ah, and who is this beautiful lady?" "This is Jessica Lucy Armstrong," Antonio said, and something in the way he spoke her full name made it sound like poetry. "Jessica, this is Rosa Salvatore, my honorary aunt and the best chef in New York, though the Michelin critics haven't figured that out yet." Rosa waved away the compliment but looked pleased. Come, come. I have the perfect table." She led them to a corner booth, partially screened by a magnificent old grapevine that had somehow survived decades indoors, its gnarled trunk rising from a brass planter and its leaves spreading across a latticed ceiling. The table itself was small, intimate without feeling cramped, with a single candle casting warm light across the crisp white tablecloth. "You come here often?" Jessica asked, after they'd settled in, and Rosa had disappeared with promises of special wine from the cellar. "It's my family's restaurant, actually," Antonio replied, looking slightly embarrassed. "Or it was. My uncle Giorgio started it in the 70s. When he passed away last year, he left it to Rosa. She'd been running it in truth for years anyway. I still own the building, but the restaurant is all hers." "I'm sorry about your uncle," Jessica said softly, recognizing the shadow of grief that flickered across his face. "Thank you. He was more of a father to me than my actual father, to be honest. He taught me that success isn't about how much money you make, but about creating something meaningful." Antonio paused, studying her face in the candlelight. "Like what you've done with Second Canvas." The arrival of wine, a magnificent Brunello that Rosa insisted was just a simple table red, created a natural break in the conversation. They went through the ritual of tasting and approving, both pretending not to notice how their fingers brushed when Antonio passed Jessica her glass. "To new beginnings," he proposed, raising his glass. "To new beginnings," she echoed, trying to ignore how young he looked in the candlelight, how the energy seemed to radiate from him like heat from a flame. The wine was extraordinary, and the food that followed even more so, classic Italian dishes elevated by decades of expertise and passion. But it was the conversation that made the evening magical. They talked for hours, moving from topic to topic with an ease that felt almost supernatural in its perfection. Antonio spoke about growing up in a family that prized tradition above all else, about the pressure to follow his father into corporate law, and his decision to pursue technology instead. "I was the family disappointment until my company took off," he admitted. "Then suddenly I was the golden child until everything fell apart." "What happened?" Jessica asked gently, sensing they were approaching the heart of his story. He took a long sip of wine before answering. "I trusted the wrong people. My fiancée, Marissa, and my best friend and business partner, David, they orchestrated a takeover while I was focused on developing new technology. By the time I realized what was happening, they'd managed to push me out of my own company. The technology I'd developed to help people became just another corporate asset." The pain in his voice was raw, immediate. Without thinking, Jessica reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "I'm so sorry, Antonio. Betrayal like that. It leaves scars." He turned his hand over, their fingers intertwining naturally. It does. But sometimes scars can be beautiful too, can't they? Like kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The breaks become part of the history, part of the beauty. Yes, Jessica whispered, thinking of her own scars, her own breaks repaired with gold. Exactly like that. The moment stretched between them, charged with understanding and something more, something neither was quite ready to name. Then Rosa appeared with dessert, warm zabaglione that she insisted they must try, and the spell shifted, though their hands remained linked on the table. As they shared the dessert, Jessica found herself talking about James, about their whirlwind romance and brief marriage. We'd known each other for years. He was my art history professor in college. But nothing happened then, of course. We reconnected at a gallery opening when I was in my 50s. It was like everything suddenly made sense. We had 3 wonderful weeks of marriage before the accident. "Do you think he would want you to be alone?" Antonio asked quietly. Jessica smiled sadly. "Number he made me promise, actually, in that joking but serious way people sometimes do. If anything happens to me," he said, "promise you won't lock your heart away." I thought it was just gallows humor at the time. Wise man. Yes, he was. She studied Antonio's face in the candlelight. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Why did you really come into my gallery last night?" Antonio was quiet for a moment, considering. "Honestly, I saw you standing there, and you reminded me of one of my favorite photographs. Edward Steichen's portrait of Gloria Swanson through black lace. There was something in your pose, something both vulnerable and strong. I wanted to understand it. And now I want to understand everything about you." The honesty in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like stepping into warm sunlight after a long winter. They talked until Rosa began turning chairs onto tables, steadfastly ignoring their attempts to apologize for staying so late. Outside, the October night had turned cool, stars visible in patches between the buildings. Antonio insisted on walking Jessica to her cab, their shoulders brushing occasionally as they moved through the quiet streets. "I know what people will say," Jessica said suddenly, stopping beneath a streetlight. "About us. About this. Whatever this is." Antonio turned to face her, his expression serious. "Let them talk. Age is just a framework society uses to categorize people, but real connections don't fit in boxes. What matters is what's real, what's true. And what's true, Antonio?" He stepped closer, one hand rising to gently cup her cheek. "What's true is that I haven't felt this alive, this present, in longer than I can remember. What's true is that when you smile, the whole world gets brighter. What's true is that I want to know every story you have to tell, want to be part of the stories you haven't lived yet." Jessica leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "We barely know each other." "Then let's change that. Have dinner with me again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. Let's take this one day at a time and see where it leads. People will judge. They'll say horrible things. Let them. I've spent too much of my life letting other people's expectations shape my choices. Haven't you?" She had. They both had. And standing there in the golden light of a Manhattan street lamp, Jessica Lucy Armstrong made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Yes," she said simply, "to all of it, yes." Antonio's smile was like sunrise. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. She didn't. Their first kiss was gentle, questioning, a conversation without words about possibility and fear and hope. When they parted, both were slightly breathless. A cab turned onto the street, its yellow bulk glowing in the darkness. Before she could step away, Antonio caught her hand. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For being brave enough to say yes." As the cab carried her home, Jessica touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of that kiss. She knew there would be challenges ahead, knew that society had strict ideas about age and love and what was appropriate. But for the first time in years, the future seemed full of light instead of shadows. In his own cab, heading uptown, Antonio sent a simple text: "Thank you for a magical evening. Dream well." The walls they'd both built around their hearts had begun to crumble, and though neither knew it yet, their real story was just beginning. The challenges would come: judgment, disapproval, outright hostility, but in that moment, all that mattered was the connection they'd found, the possibility of something beautiful growing from the ashes of their past pain. Above the city, the stars continued their ancient dance, bearing witness to yet another love story unfolding beneath their distant light. And somewhere, perhaps, James was smiling, knowing that Jessica had finally found the courage to keep her promise and unlock her heart once more. Chapter 3. The First Storm. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's annual charity gala had always been one of New York's premier social events, but this year held special significance for Jessica. Second Canvas was being honored for its contributions to emerging artists' programs, and she'd been asked to give a short speech about the importance of accessible art education. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a triumph, the culmination of years of hard work and dedication to her vision. But these weren't normal circumstances. Jessica stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the draped neckline of her midnight blue Valentino gown. The dress was a masterpiece of understated elegance, its simple lines and subtle beading allowing her natural grace to shine through. She'd chosen it carefully, aware that tonight would be their first official appearance as a couple. After 3 weeks of quiet dinners and private conversations, they were about to step into the spotlight. Her phone buzzed with a text from Antonio. "Car will be there in 15 minutes. You ready for this?" She smiled at his concern, typing back, "Ready as I'll ever be." "You?" His response was immediate. "With you?" "Always." The confidence in those 2 words steadied her nerves. They'd discussed this extensively, whether to appear together publicly, how to handle the inevitable reactions. Antonio had been adamant about not hiding their relationship. "I'm proud to be with you," he'd said. "Let them talk." The town car arrived precisely on time, Antonio stepping out to help her in. He looked devastating in his tuxedo, his dark hair slightly tousled in that way that suggested both carelessness and careful styling. His face lit up when he saw her, that now familiar expression that made her feel both beautiful and cherished. "You look absolutely stunning," he said, kissing her cheek. "Ready to scandalize New York society." "Shouldn't I be asking you that?" she countered, settling into the car's leather interior. "You have more to lose here than I do." His expression turned serious. "Jessica, the only thing I'm afraid of losing is you. The rest? It's just noise." The drive to the Met was quick, the streets relatively clear for a Saturday evening. They spent it in comfortable silence, hands linked, each lost in their own thoughts about what the night might bring. The first flash of cameras caught them as they stepped out of the car, the paparazzi more interested in documenting arrivals than actually identifying who they were photographing. That changed quickly. "Mr. Salvatore, over here! Ms. Armstrong, a comment please. Antonio, are you two dating?" Antonio's hand was steady at the small of her back as they navigated the gauntlet of reporters. They'd prepared for this, agreed to respond with dignified silence and genuine smiles. Let people draw their own conclusions. Inside the Great Hall, the space had been transformed into a glittering wonderland of lights and flowers. The cream of New York society milled about, air-kissing and trading gossip over champagne. Jessica felt the shift in the atmosphere as they entered, the subtle turning of heads, the whispered conversations behind raised hands. "Jessica, darling." The voice belonged to Mariella Van Houten, one of her oldest friends in the art world. The woman's embrace was warm, but her eyes were sharp as they flicked between Jessica and Antonio. "You must introduce me to your friend." "Mariella, this is Antonio Salvatore. Antonio, Mariella van Houten, curator of the Guggenheim's Modern Wing." "Charmed," Mariella said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Jessica, dear, I need to steal you for a moment. The board wants to discuss the spring exhibition schedule." Before either could respond, Blake Winchester appeared at Antonio's elbow. "Tony! Man, we need to talk. Now!" Jessica squeezed Antonio's hand before letting Mariella lead her away. She watched as Blake practically dragged Antonio toward a quiet corner, their body language suggesting this wouldn't be a pleasant conversation. "What are you thinking?" Mariella hissed once they were out of earshot. "He's half your age. Do you have any idea what people are saying?" "I imagine they're saying quite a lot," Jessica replied calmly, snagging a champagne flute from a passing waiter. "Most of it probably unkind." "This isn't funny, Jessica. You've worked too hard to build your reputation, the gallery's reputation. To throw it all away for, what? A midlife crisis with a boy toy." The champagne suddenly tasted bitter. "That boy toy is one of the most brilliant minds in neurotechnology. He's kind, genuine, and makes me happier than I've been since James died. But I don't expect you to understand that." Across the room, she could see Antonio's face growing stormy as Blake gestured emphatically. She started to move toward them, but Mariella caught her arm. "Think about what you're doing. Not just to yourself, but to him. His company's still recovering from scandal. This will destroy any chance he has of rebuilding his reputation." Before Jessica could respond, raised voices cut through the elegant murmur of the crowd. Blake's words, though clearly not intended to carry, rang out with painful clarity. "What are you doing, man? She's twice your age. Is this some kind of mother figure thing?" The champagne glass trembled in Jessica's hand. She set it down carefully, her movements deliberate as she fought to maintain composure. But before she could turn to leave, Antonio's voice rang out, clear and firm. "The only disturbing thing here is your narrow-mindedness, Blake. Don't ever disrespect her again." The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica felt every eye in the room turn toward them, the weight of judgment and speculation almost physical in its intensity. Antonio crossed the space between them in long strides, his face set in lines of quiet fury. "Let's get some air," he suggested softly, offering his arm. They made their way to the rooftop garden, the October night crisp and clear above them. The city sprawled out below, a tapestry of lights and shadows that seemed to mirror Jessica's tumultuous emotions. "I'm so sorry," she whispered once they were alone. "You shouldn't have to defend me." Antonio turned to face her, his expression fierce. "Stop! You have nothing to apologize for. Blake's an ass who can't see past his own prejudices. And before you say it, because I can see you thinking it, this isn't going to destroy my reputation or my business. If anything, it proves I'm finally living authentically instead of trying to please everyone else." "But they'll never stop, Antonio. The whispers, the judgment, the well-meaning friends trying to save us from ourselves. It will always be like this." He stepped closer, framing her face with his hands. "Then let it be like this. Let them whisper. Let them judge. I don't care. The only opinion that matters to me is yours. Do you want to be with me, Jessica?" "Yes," she breathed. "God help me, yes. Then the rest is just noise." He kissed her then, right there on the Met's rooftop garden with all of Manhattan as their witness. It wasn't the careful, gentle kiss of their first night. This was a declaration, a defiance, a promise. When they broke apart, Jessica noticed movement by the door. A small crowd had gathered, some looking shocked, others smiling, a few quickly turning away. But for the first time since this began, she didn't feel the need to apologize or explain. "Shall we go back in?" Antonio asked. You still have a speech to give. Jessica squared her shoulders, feeling stronger than she had all evening. Yes, but first. She pulled him down for another kiss, no longer caring who saw or what they thought. Let them talk. Let them judge. Some things were worth the storm. Later that night, as they shared a quiet drink at Piccolo Sogno, Rosa had kept the kitchen open, tutting about them needing proper food after such an ordeal. Jessica finally allowed herself to fully process the evening. You know, this is just the beginning, she said, swirling the last of her wine. Tonight was just the first wave. Antonio reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Then we'll weather it together. Every storm, every judgment, every well-meaning friend who thinks they know better than we do what we need. Together. Rosa appeared with 2 plates of tiramisu, setting them down with a maternal pat to both their shoulders. Love, she announced in her heavily accented English, does not ask permission from anyone. It knows its own mind. Looking at Antonio's smile in the candlelight, Jessica felt something settle in her heart. The storm would come again. Many storms, probably. But here, in this moment, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Outside, the October wind whistled through the village streets, carrying away the last echoes of society's whispers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new judgments, new battles to fight. But tonight, in a small Italian restaurant that smelled of garlic and wisdom, 2 people who had dared to defy convention sat hand in hand, proving that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply choose happiness, regardless of what anyone else might think. The first storm had passed, leaving them stronger in its wake. And if there was one thing both Jessica and Antonio knew with absolute certainty, it was that they would face whatever came next, exactly as they had faced this evening. Together, unbowed, and unapologetically in love. Chapter 4. Family Ties. Unravel. The Salvatore family estate in Westchester County stood as a testament to old money and older traditions. Built in the 1920s, the Georgian-style mansion had witnessed 4 generations of family dinners, celebrations, and crises. Tonight would add another chapter to its history, though perhaps not the kind its original builders had envisioned. Antonio stood in the circular driveway, watching Jessica's fingers worry at the pearl necklace she wore. The afternoon sun caught the silver in her hair, making it shimmer like starlight. He reached over and caught her hand, stilling its nervous movement. "We don't have to do this," he said softly. "We could go back to the city, have dinner at Rosa's." Jessica squared her shoulders, a gesture he'd come to recognize as her gathering courage. "Yes, we do. They're your family, Antonio. They deserve a chance to understand." He kissed her temple, marveling at her strength. The past week had been a whirlwind since their appearance at the Met Gala. Photos had circulated online, speculation had run rampant, and his phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages from family members ranging from concerned to outraged. His sister Valentina had been the first to respond, sending a text that simply read, "Have you lost your mind?" She'd refused all his calls since then, communicating only through their mother, Isabella. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper who had known Antonio since he was born. Her usual warm smile seemed strained as she greeted them. "Your mother is in the drawing room," she said, carefully not meeting Jessica's eyes. "Miss Valentina sends her regrets. She won't be joining us this evening." Antonio felt Jessica's slight flinch and squeezed her hand. "Her loss," he said firmly, loud enough for his voice to carry. The drawing room was a study in old-world elegance, with its crystal chandelier and silk damask wallpaper. Isabella Salvatore stood by the fireplace, every inch the family matriarch in her perfectly tailored St. John suit. Her dark eyes, so like Antonio's, swept over them with calculated assessment. "Antonio," she said, stepping forward to kiss his cheek, You're late. Traffic on the sawmill, he replied, then gestured to Jessica. Mother, I'd like you to meet Jessica Lucy Armstrong. Jessica, my mother, Isabella Salvatore. Jessica extended her hand with perfect grace. Mrs. Salvatore, thank you for having me in your home. Isabella's handshake was brief, her smile not reaching her eyes. Please sit. Mrs. Peterson will bring drinks shortly. Antonio, your father sends his apologies. He's been delayed at the office. They all knew it was a lie. Fernando Salvatore was deliberately avoiding this dinner, leaving his wife to handle what he saw as their son's latest act of rebellion. The next 15 minutes were an exercise in painful small talk. Isabella asked pointed questions about second canvas, her tone suggesting she was interviewing a potential employee rather than meeting her son's partner. Jessica answered each query with poise, her gallery owner's experience in handling difficult clients serving her well. When Mrs. Peterson arrived with drinks, a martini for Isabella, scotch for Antonio, and white wine for Jessica, the older woman interrupted a particularly probing question about the gallery's financial structure. Dinner is ready, Mrs. Salvatore. The dining room was intimidating in its formality, a massive mahogany table set for 4, though only 3 places were occupied. The empty chair where Valentina should have sat seemed to mock them. I understand you were married before, Isabella said as the first course was served. James Armstrong, wasn't it? A professor? Yes, Jessica replied quietly. We were married briefly before he passed away. How tragic, and no children. Mother, Antonio warned, but Isabella waved him off. It's a natural question, darling. Family is everything to the Salvatores. Surely you understand my concern about your relationship's impact on the family legacy. Jessica set down her soup spoon with careful precision. Mrs. Salvatore, I'm 60 years old. I think we can dispense with euphemisms. You're worried that I'm too old to give Antonio children and that I might be taking advantage of him for his money or status. The directness seemed to startle Isabella. Well, Let me be equally direct, Jessica continued, her voice gentle but firm. I have my own money, my own career, and my own life. I'm with Antonio because we connect on a level I've experienced only once before in my life. I understand your concerns as a mother, but your son is a grown man, capable of making his own choices. My son, Isabella said sharply, is barely older than my youngest niece. He's still recovering from that disaster with Marissa. He needs someone who can give him a future, not someone living in her past. That's enough. Antonio's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You don't know anything about Jessica or what she means to me. You haven't even tried. Antonio, please, Isabella sighed. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From happiness? From finding someone who sees me for who I am, not what the family wants me to be? From scandal, from throwing away your chance to rebuild your reputation. Do you think the board members at your new company will take you seriously when you're parading around with a woman twice your age? Jessica stood quietly. I should go. No. Antonio caught her hand. You're not going anywhere. Mother, I love you, but you need to understand something. Jessica isn't going anywhere either. She's part of my life now. You can accept that and get to know this remarkable woman who makes me happier than I've been in years, or you can continue judging us and risk losing me entirely. Your choice. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella stared at their joined hands, something shifting in her expression. You're serious about this, she said finally. It wasn't a question. Completely. Isabella took a long sip of her martini, then set it down with a decisive click. Well then, Jessica, perhaps we should start over. Tell me about your gallery's Emerging Artists program. Antonio mentioned it's quite innovative. The rest of dinner was stilted but civil. Isabella made an effort, though her questions still carried undercurrents of doubt. When they finally left, the night air felt like freedom. In the car, Jessica was quiet until they passed the city limits. "That went better than I expected." Antonio laughed without humor. "Only because Valentina wasn't there. She would have made Mother look positively welcoming." "She's your sister, Antonio. She'll come around." "Maybe, maybe not. But I meant what I said in there. You're not going anywhere, and neither am I." Jessica leaned her head against his shoulder, letting the rhythm of the car soothe her nerves. "Your mother's not wrong about everything, you know. There are things I can't give you." "Stop." He turned to face her. "Traffic be damned. You give me everything I need. Joy, understanding, challenge, love. The rest, it's just details. Details matter to families like yours. Then they'll have to adapt. The world is changing, Jessica. Maybe it's time the Salvatores changed too." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the city lights growing brighter as they approached Manhattan. Near Washington Square, Antonio spoke again. "Move in with me." Jessica sat up straight. "What?" "Move in with me. I know it's fast, but I don't care. I love you. I want to wake up with you every morning, not just when we can arrange our schedules. I want to face whatever comes next, together, under one roof. Your mother will have a heart attack." "Probably," he grinned. "Is that a yes?" Jessica looked at him. This brilliant, passionate man who had crashed into her carefully ordered life and turned everything upside down, who had faced down his family's disappointment with unwavering certainty in them. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, to all of it." Later that night, in bed, Jessica traced lazy patterns on Antonio's chest. "Your mother will come around, you know. I saw it in her eyes when you stood up to her. She loves you more than she disapproves of me. And Valentina? She'll take longer, but she'll miss her brother eventually." Antonio pulled her closer, breathing in the lavender scent of her hair. "Thank you for tonight, for facing them with me, for being you. Thank you for choosing me, for being brave enough to stand up to them." Outside, the city hummed its eternal lullaby of traffic and distant sirens. Inside, two people who had defied family expectations and societal norms held each other close, their hearts beating in sync. The family ties might have frayed tonight, but new bonds had been forged, stronger perhaps for being chosen rather than inherited. And if some threads of the old tapestry had unraveled, well, sometimes that's what it takes to weave something new and beautiful. Morning would bring new challenges, new judgments, new battles to fight. But for now, in the quiet darkness of their shared bed, none of that mattered. They had chosen each other, chosen love over convention, chosen happiness over expectations. And really, what else could family want for their children, if not happiness? Chapter 5. The Gallery Incident. Second Canvas had never looked more beautiful. The gallery space gleamed under carefully positioned lights, each artwork positioned to create a perfect dialogue with its neighbors. Tonight's opening was showcasing Reflections of Time, a collection featuring both emerging and established artists exploring themes of age, memory, and transformation. Jessica had spent months curating it, though she hadn't realized when she started how personal the theme would become. The evening had been in the works long before her relationship with Antonio became public, but now it felt laden with additional meaning. This would be their first major event together since moving in together 3 weeks ago, and Jessica's first time hosting many of her longtime collectors since the news had spread. "Everything looks perfect," Antonio said, coming up behind her as she adjusted a small bronze sculpture. He'd come straight from the office, his suit still impeccable despite the long day. "Stop worrying." "I'm not worried," she lied, smoothing her already smooth silver hair. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a sculptural black dress that managed to be both artistic and elegant, paired with a dramatic silver necklace Antonio had given her. "Liar," he said fondly, kissing her temple. "It's going to be fine. The collection is extraordinary, the wine is excellent, and anyone who can't see past their own prejudices doesn't deserve to be here anyway." Before she could respond, her assistant Maya appeared. "First guests are arriving, Jessica." The opening began well enough. Regular collectors and art world figures filtered in, making appropriate noises of appreciation at the works. If some seemed more interested in watching Jessica and Antonio's interactions than the art, well, that was to be expected. Then Regina Blackwood arrived. Regina had been one of Jessica's closest friends in the art world for over 2 decades. They'd supported each other through divorces, Regina's, loss, Jessica's, and countless professional challenges. But she hadn't returned Jessica's calls since the Met Gala photos surfaced. She swept in wearing Chanel and disdain in equal measure, a small group of socialites trailing in her wake like well-dressed remoras. Her voice carried clearly across the gallery. I simply had to see for myself. Though I hardly recognized the place, it's taken such a youthful turn lately. Jessica felt Antonio tense beside her, but squeezed his hand in warning. This was her territory, her battle to fight. "Regina," she said warmly, approaching her former friend. "I'm so glad you could make it. The Rothman piece you admired last month is still available, if you're interested." Regina's smile was arctic. "Oh, darling, I'm not here to shop, just showing support for what's left of your reputation." Her eyes flicked to Antonio, who was discussing a large canvas with a collector across the room. "Though I must say you've found an interesting way to attract a younger demographic." "Regina," Jessica kept her voice low, "if you have something to say to me, say it directly, but don't disrupt my opening." "Disrupt? My dear, you've done quite enough disrupting on your own." Regina's voice rose slightly, drawing attention from nearby guests. "What would James think of you now? Throwing yourself at a man young enough to be your son?" The gallery seemed to go silent, though the background music played on. Jessica felt the weight of every stare, heard the whispered comments beginning to circulate. "I can't support someone who preys on younger men," Regina announced loudly, turning to her entourage. "Ladies, shall we? I believe there's a more appropriate opening at pace tonight." They moved as a group toward the door, their exit staged for maximum dramatic effect. Jessica stood her ground, years of gallery experience helping her maintain a composed expression despite the burning in her cheeks. But before Regina could reach the door, another voice rang out, young, clear, and furious. "How dare you!" Maya, Jessica's assistant, had stepped into Regina's path. At 25, she was usually quiet and professional, but now her dark eyes flashed with anger. "Excuse me?" Regina drew herself up, looking down at Maya with practiced disdain. "I said, how dare you? Do you have any idea what Jessica has done for artists in this city, for other galleries? For you?" Maya's voice shook but remained strong. 3 years ago, when your gallery was struggling, who helped you secure financing? Who convinced the Hendersons to invest? Who stayed up all night helping you reorganize your entire collection?" Regina's face flushed. "That's hardly relevant." "It's completely relevant," Maya continued, "because it shows exactly who Jessica is. Someone who helps others, who builds people up instead of tearing them down. And now she's found happiness with someone who appreciates her brilliant mind and beautiful soul, and all you can do is try to shame her. For what? For loving someone? For being loved in return?" The gallery was absolutely silent now. Even the background music seemed to have paused. "I've watched them together for months," Maya said, her voice softening. "I've seen how they look at each other, how they support each other, how they make each other better. Age has nothing to do with it. Love has everything to do with it. And if you can't see that, Mrs. Blackwood, then maybe you're the one who needs to reevaluate your life." Antonio had moved to Jessica's side during Maya's speech, his hand finding hers automatically. Regina looked around the gallery, seemingly noticing for the first time that her dramatic exit had backfired. Instead of supportive smirks, she found thoughtful faces, some nodding in agreement with Maya's words. "Well," Regina said stiffly, "I can see I've overstayed my welcome." "You were welcome until you chose to be cruel," Jessica said quietly. "Goodbye, Regina." After Regina's departure, something shifted in the gallery's atmosphere. People who had been holding back came forward, offering support, or simply engaging normally with the art and the hosts. A prominent collector made a significant purchase, pointedly telling Jessica that Second Canvas's dedication to both emerging artists and emerging forms of love was commendable. Later, after the last guests had left and Maya was supervising the cleanup, Jessica found herself in Antonio's arms in her office. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Surprisingly, yes. She leaned into his embrace. Regina's words hurt, but Maya's response, it healed something I didn't even know was wounded. She was magnificent. Remind me to give her a raise. Jessica laughed, already planning to, though I suspect she didn't do it for a raise. No, Antonio agreed. She did it because it was right, because she sees what we see, that love doesn't conform to society's expectations. It simply is. Jessica turned in his arms to face him. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best. He kissed her softly. Come on, let's go home. Rosa's keeping the kitchen open for us. As they walked through the darkened gallery, Jessica paused to look at one of the centerpiece works, a massive photograph showing hands of different ages intertwined, creating an abstract pattern of youth and experience melded together. You know what Regina doesn't understand, she said thoughtfully. Age isn't about numbers. It's about how fully you choose to live each moment, and I've never felt more alive than I do with you. Antonio's smile was tender in the dim light. That's because you're not living in your past, and I'm not living for my future. We're just living right now together. They left the gallery hand in hand, stepping into the cool night air. The incident had left its mark, but not the one Regina had intended. Instead of shame or doubt, Jessica felt stronger, more certain of their choice to be together. Sometimes it takes an act of cruelty to reveal the depth of love's support system. Maya's fierce defense, the collector's quiet support, and Antonio's steady presence had transformed what could have been a devastating evening into a triumph of a different kind. As their car headed toward the village and Rosa's promised comfort food, Jessica thought about James, Regina's words. What would James think of you now? Had been meant to wound, but Jessica knew the truth. James would have been happy for her. He had always believed in love's power to surprise and renew. And really, wasn't that what their relationship was about? Not about defying age or shocking society, but about being open to love's surprise, to life's ability to offer new beginnings at any moment. The gallery incident had tried to shame them, but had instead strengthened them. And if there were more Regina Blackwoods in their future, which there surely would be, they would face them together, supported by those who understood that love's only true measure is the joy it brings to those brave enough to embrace it. Chapter 6. Corporate Backlash. The headline blared across Antonio's tablet with brutal clarity. Age gap romance threatens multi-million-dollar tech deal. Below it, the Wall Street Journal detailed how Neurotech's potential partnership with a major medical device manufacturer was under review following concerns about leadership stability. The article included a photo from the gallery opening, but the caption twisted their moment of joy into something questionable. Tech CEO Antonio Salvatore, 30, in controversial relationship with gallery owner Jessica Armstrong, 60. Antonio sat in his corner office at Neurotech's temporary headquarters, watching the morning sun illuminate the prototype neural interfaces on his desk like archaeological artifacts. Each device represented months of work, millions in research funding, and the potential to help thousands of patients. Now, because of society's narrow-mindedness, it all hung by a thread. His phone buzzed. Another message from Midwest Medical's CEO, board meeting emergency session. Partnership terms need revision. It was the third potential partner to waver this week. A knock at the door made him look up. Daniel, his assistant, stood there with an expression that made Antonio's stomach sink. "They're all here," Daniel said quietly. Theodore Hawthorne brought the major shareholders. "And sir, Johnson & Johnson's representatives are with them." Antonio's hands clenched. The J&J deal was supposed to be confidential, their largest potential partnership yet, worth over $200 million in development funds. If they were here... How many? 15 in total. Mrs. Chen from Singapore and the European investors are on video conference. They're calling it an emergency oversight meeting. Emergency oversight. Antonio stood, straightening his tie. The term had specific implications in their corporate structure. It meant they could force immediate leadership changes without a standard board vote. "Get me Maya on the phone and call Jessica. She needs to know what's happening." The main conference room crackled with tension. Theodore Hawthorne sat at the head of the table, silver hair immaculate, expression grave. Around him sat the power players who had helped rebuild Antonio's career after the Marissa debacle. Venture capitalists, medical technology pioneers, institutional investors. On the screens, more faces waited in practiced neutrality. "Antonio," Hawthorne's voice carried the weight of decades in corporate boardrooms. "Please sit. We have serious concerns to address." "About our Q3 projections?" Antonio remained standing, voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "About the company's future." Sarah Patel, representing their largest institutional investor, slid a document across the table. "We've lost 3 potential partnerships in 2 weeks. Midwest Medical is wavering. And now J&J ... All because of public perception," Antonio cut in. "Not because of our technology, not because of our results, but because I dared to fall in love with someone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of appropriate." "This isn't about love," Robert Fisher, their regulatory compliance officer, interjected. "This is about stability, about judgment. The FDA approval process requires... The FDA cares about data." Antonio's voice sharpened. "Our trials show a 92% success rate, the highest in the industry." "Success rates don't matter if we can't secure partnerships," Hawthorne said. "The medical device industry is conservative, Antonio. They need to trust not just our technology, but our leadership." The J&J representative, Dr. Elizabeth Warren, spoke for the first time. "Mr. Salvatore, your personal life wouldn't normally concern us, but the media attention, the public scrutiny, it raises questions about focus, about decision-making capacity." "Questions?" Antonio laughed without humor. "Let's talk about real questions. Like why a successful relationship makes you doubt my judgment more than a failed one did. When Marissa betrayed me, when I lost everything, you all backed me. But now that I'm happy, now that I'm more focused and productive than ever, suddenly I'm unstable." He pulled up the company's metrics on the main screen, data flowing in real time. "Look at these numbers. Patent applications up 200% since last quarter. Trial success rates unprecedented in the industry. Employee satisfaction at record highs. But you're willing to throw all that away because my partner is older than society thinks she should be." "It's not that simple." Mrs. Chen's voice came through crisp despite the distance. "The Asian markets are particularly sensitive to this kind of unconventional situation." "Then let me make it simple." Antonio's voice was deadly quiet. "You want to remove me? Go ahead. But remember, I own 40% of this company. I created the core technology, and I have documented evidence of age discrimination and bias influencing corporate decisions." He let that sink in before continuing. "But more importantly, I have this." He pulled up another screen, dozens of emails from patients in their trials. "These people can move again, feel again, live again because of our technology. Are you really willing to deny them hope because you're uncomfortable with who I love?" The room fell silent. Dr. Warren studied the patient testimonials with growing interest. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "we're approaching this from the wrong angle. Mr. Salvatore, if you could demonstrate that your personal situation won't affect the company's stability." "I've been demonstrating that every day," Antonio replied. "But I'll make it clearer. I'll double my equity stake, put more of my own money behind my confidence in this company, and Jessica will sign any assurance agreement you need, confirming she has no claim on my shares or patents." "You'd do that?" Hawthorne looked surprised. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect this company and its mission, but I won't hide my relationship. I won't apologize for love, and I won't let prejudice destroy something that could help millions of people." The next hour was intense negotiation, terms, conditions, guarantees. But by the end, a new agreement had taken shape. Antonio would increase his stake, the board would maintain current leadership, and J&J would proceed with the partnership under enhanced oversight provisions. When Antonio finally left the office that night, the city had transformed into its nighttime self. He found Jessica in their apartment's home office, worry clear on her face. "That bad?" she asked. "Could have been worse," he said, loosening his tie. "They wanted me out, tried to use the partnerships as leverage." Jessica set down her tablet. "Because of me. Because they're scared of anything that challenges their worldview." He pulled her up into his arms. "But we won, not just survived, won. The J&J deal is going forward, the board backed down, and most importantly, you and I are still us." "I never want to cost you your dreams," Jessica whispered. "You are my dream. The company, the technology, they're important, but you're essential. Besides," he smiled, "nothing motivates me like people saying I can't do something." Later that night, they stood on their balcony, watching the city lights twinkle like earthbound stars. The corporate world could judge, investors could threaten, markets could waver. But none of it could touch the simple truth of two hearts beating in sync, two souls recognizing each other across the artificial boundaries of time and convention. Love, they were learning, didn't just defy age, it defied everything: corporate politics, market pressures, societal expectations. And if defending that love meant facing down boardrooms full of doubters and skeptics, well, that was a small price to pay for happiness. Above them, the winter sky spread like a canvas of possibilities, each star a reminder that the universe operates on its own rules, paying no attention to human prejudices or limitations. And in their hearts, both Jessica and Antonio knew that they had won something far more valuable than any corporate victory. They had won the right to love openly, honestly, and without apology. The backlash would continue, of course. There would be more meetings, more doubts, more challenges. But they would face them together, stronger for having weathered this storm, more certain than ever that their love was worth any price. Chapter 7. The Park Confrontation. Central Park in autumn was their sanctuary. Every Sunday, regardless of weather or commitments, Jessica and Antonio walked through the park, eventually settling on their favorite bench near the Bethesda fountain. It was their way of claiming normalcy in a world that still struggled to accept their love. This particular November Sunday carried the last warmth of fall, drawing crowds to enjoy what might be the final pleasant weekend before winter. Children chased soap bubbles that caught rainbow colors in the sunlight. Street musicians filled the air with jazz, and the Fountain spray created ephemeral halos in the afternoon light. "Valentina called this morning," Antonio said, passing Jessica a coffee from their favorite cart vendor. The elderly vendor, Mr. Kim, had become part of their Sunday ritual, always having their orders ready, one black coffee, one latte with an extra shot. Jessica's hand paused midway to taking the cup. "Really?" "She wants to have dinner, with both of us." He smiled at her surprised expression. "Mother's been working on her, and after everything that happened at the board meeting—" "Are you ready for that? Are you?" Before Jessica could respond, they noticed a girl watching them from nearby. She was perhaps 15, dressed in a private school uniform, trying to appear casual in her observation, but clearly fascinated. A woman who had to be her mother was typing furiously on her phone, shooting them occasional glares. "Sometimes," Jessica said softly, "I forget that people see us differently. Moments like this, it just feels normal." The girl had taken out her own phone now, seemingly torn between taking a photo and looking away. Her mother finally noticed her daughter's interest and followed her gaze. Her face hardened with disapproval. "Sophie," they heard her snap, "stop staring, it's rude." "But Mom," the girl, Sophie, protested, "they look so happy, like those couples in your old movies." "They're not a couple," her mother said sharply. They're something else entirely." Antonio started to rise, but Jessica held him back. She'd recognized something in Sophie's face, a yearning to understand, to see beyond the limitations adults had taught her to accept. The mother, however, had worked herself into righteous indignation. She marched over to their bench, designer handbag clutched like a shield, dragging a mortified Sophie behind her. "Excuse me," she began, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone who believed their opinion was universal law. "I've seen you here before, and I've held my tongue, but I simply can't anymore. You're setting a terrible example." "Mom, please don't," Sophie whispered, her face burning red. "This is so embarrassing." "No, Sophie, they need to hear this. What are you teaching our young people about relationships, about self-respect, about natural order?" Jessica felt Antonio tense beside her, but squeezed his hand. "What exactly about love offends you?" she asked calmly. "Love?" The woman's laugh was bitter. "Please, what could you possibly have in common? What could this possibly be besides some sick game? She's old enough to be your mother." Around them, other park-goers had begun to notice the confrontation. Some quickly looked away, but others watched with undisguised interest. A young couple nearby had stopped taking selfies to listen. An elderly man walking his dogs slowed his pace. "Sophie," Jessica addressed the teenager directly, ignoring her mother for the moment. "You're about 15, aren't you? What do you want to do with your life?" The question seemed to surprise both mother and daughter. Sophie straightened slightly. Something sparked in her eyes. I want to be a marine biologist. I'm really interested in studying deep-sea ecosystems." "That's fascinating," Jessica said genuinely. "And when you become a marine biologist, when you're making discoveries and changing our understanding of ocean life, should someone be able to tell you that you can't because you're too young, or too female, or because it doesn't fit their idea of what's appropriate?" "That's completely different," the mother interjected, but her voice held a note of uncertainty now. "Is it?" Jessica stood, her voice carrying clearly but calmly. "Your daughter dreams of exploring ocean depths. I dream of loving and being loved. Both are fundamental human experiences. Both deserve respect." "You're twisting things," the woman sputtered. "This isn't about dreams or respect. This is about morality." "No," Antonio said quietly, standing beside Jessica. "This is about fear. Fear of what's different, fear of what you don't understand. But love isn't something to be feared. It's something to be celebrated in all its forms." Sophie was looking at them with growing interest, her embarrassment forgotten. "How did you meet?" "Sophie." "In my art gallery," Jessica answered, smiling at the memory. "He came in just before closing and started talking about memory and perception in art. We connected over ideas first, over who we are as people, not how old we are." That's actually really romantic," Sophie said thoughtfully. Her mother stared at her as if she'd never seen her before. "It's inappropriate," the mother insisted, but her voice had lost its certainty. "Come on, Sophie. We're leaving." "Wait!" Sophie pulled away from her mother's grasp. "I'm sorry for how she treated you. I think it's brave what you're doing, not caring what people think." "Oh, we care," Jessica said gently. "It hurts when people judge without knowing us, but we've learned that their judgment says more about them than it does about us." The mother stood frozen, something shifting in her expression. Perhaps it was Jessica's dignity in the face of attack, or Antonio's quiet strength, or the way they stood together, neither defensive nor apologetic. More likely, it was seeing her daughter's admiration for their courage. I may have spoken hastily." The words seemed to surprise even her. "Sophie, we should go." As they walked away, Sophie's voice drifted back. "Mum, you always tell me to fight for what I believe in. Isn't that what they're doing? Fighting for their love?" The crowd that had gathered began to disperse. The elderly couple on a nearby bench gave them a quiet thumbs up. The young couple who had been taking selfies approached hesitantly. "That was amazing," the young woman said. "My parents, they don't approve of us either. Different reasons, but you give us hope." One by one, people stopped to share their own stories of love across cultures, across religions, across boundaries of all kinds. Their bench became a temporary confessional for stories of love that didn't fit society's mold. "Well," Antonio said when they were finally alone again, "that was intense." "It was educational," Jessica corrected. "For Sophie, definitely. Maybe even for her mother a little bit. You were amazing. The way you spoke to Sophie instead of fighting with her mother. Fighting fear with anger never works. Sometimes you have to show people a different way of seeing things." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Besides, I meant what I said. Their judgment says more about them than us." They sat together as the afternoon light began to fade, watching families pack up their picnics, musicians pack away their instruments, and the park slowly transition from day to evening. Their coffee had gone cold, forgotten in the drama, but neither moved to get new cups. "You know what I love about you," Antonio said suddenly. "Among many things, the way you turned confrontation into connection. You could have gotten angry, could have fought back, but instead you reached out to that girl. You showed her what real strength looks like." "I had a good teacher," Jessica smiled. "A certain someone who faced down his entire board of directors with dignity rather than anger." A cool breeze rustled the leaves above them, sending a shower of golden foliage spiraling down around their bench. In the distance, the fountain's spray caught the last rays of sunlight, creating momentary rainbows. As they finally stood to leave, they noticed Sophie and her mother sitting on a distant bench, deep in what appeared to be serious conversation. The mother looked up, caught their eye, and after a moment's hesitation offered a small nod. Sometimes, they realized, love's greatest victory isn't in grand gestures or public declarations, but in quiet moments of understanding, in the slow opening of minds and hearts to possibilities they'd never considered before. Hand in hand, they walked home through the gathering dusk, their shadows merging into one on the path behind them. The park had witnessed another small battle in their ongoing war against prejudice, but more importantly, it had witnessed another moment of truth, that love, when it's real, can withstand any storm, face any challenger, and emerge stronger for the test. And somewhere in the city, a 15-year-old girl was perhaps looking at the world a little differently, understanding that love's boundaries are far wider and more beautiful than society's narrow definitions would have us believe. Chapter 8. Finding Allies. The Salvatore family's Thanksgiving dinner had always been a formal affair, held in the grand dining room of the Westchester estate. This year, however, Isabella had surprised everyone by agreeing to hold it at Antonio and Jessica's Greenwich Village apartment. It was a concession that spoke volumes about her growing acceptance of their relationship, though the tension in her voice when she'd called to suggest it suggested she was still adjusting. Jessica stood in their open-plan kitchen, surrounded by the organized chaos of holiday preparation. The apartment filled with the aroma of herbs and roasting turkey, mingling with the scent of the fresh flowers Antonio had brought home that morning. She'd been up since dawn, determined to make this dinner perfect, or at least as perfect as possible given the circumstances. "You're stress cooking again," Antonio observed, coming up behind her to kiss her neck. He was still in his running clothes, having just returned from his morning jog. "The turkey looks fine, the stuffing smells amazing, and if anyone doesn't like it, Rosa sent backup lasagna." I know. Jessica sighed, leaning back against him. "I just want everything to be perfect. Your mother actually speaking to me is progress. I don't want to mess it up." "You won't." He turned her to face him. "And you're not alone in this. I invited some allies." "Allies?" "Maya's coming, and Daniel from the office, plus my cousin Isabella, the young one, not my mother. She specifically asked to be here to support us." Jessica felt some of her tension ease. Maya had become more than an assistant since her fierce defense at the gallery opening, and young Isabella had been one of the few family members to support them from the start. Having them there would help balance the energy. The doorbell rang at precisely 2 o'clock. Isabella Salvatore Sr. stood on their doorstep, elegant as always in a navy dress and pearls. Behind her, Fernando Salvatore looked uncomfortable but determined, while Valentina, in her first appearance at any family event since their relationship became public, hung back slightly. "Jessica," Isabella said formally, air-kissing her cheek, "the apartment is lovely, though perhaps a bit small for family gatherings." "It's perfect," Valentina said unexpectedly. "It feels like a home, not a museum." She stepped forward, offering Jessica a slightly awkward hug. "I brought wine, and an apology if you'll accept it." Jessica felt tears prick at her eyes but blinked them back. "Both are very welcome." Young Isabella arrived next, bringing energy and warmth into the space. At 23, she was the family rebel, having chosen to become a public defender rather than join the family law firm. She hugged Jessica tightly. "I've been dying to see the place," she grinned, "and to see Aunt Isabella's face when she realizes you have better taste than she does." Maya and Daniel arrived together, carrying desserts from Rosa's and what looked suspiciously like a bottle of very expensive scotch. The apartment filled with voices and movement as everyone settled in, Antonio playing host while Jessica put the finishing touches on dinner. In the kitchen, Valentina appeared with an offer to help. "I'm good at chopping things," she said tentatively, "and I owe you a conversation." Jessica handed her a knife and a bowl of herbs. "I'm listening." "I was wrong," Valentina said simply, focusing on the herbs. "I saw what I expected to see. Someone taking advantage of my brother when he was vulnerable. I didn't bother to look deeper, to see how happy he is, how much you both light up around each other." She looked up, meeting Jessica's eyes. "I'm sorry." Before Jessica could respond, young Isabella poked her head in. "Are you two having a moment? Because Aunt Isabella is about to spontaneously combust over the modern art in the living room, and someone should probably rescue her." The ice broken, they laughed together. Jessica sent them both out with appetizers, while she checked the turkey one final time. In the living room, she found Antonio deep in conversation with his father, about Neurotech's latest developments, while Maya and Daniel chatted with young Isabella about her recent court cases. Isabella Sr. stood examining a particularly striking canvas, her expression unreadable. "It's beautiful," Isabella said as Jessica approached. "The way the colors seem to move, to tell different stories depending on how you look at it, like people perhaps, more complex than they appear at first glance." Jessica recognized the olive branch for what it was. "That's exactly what drew me to it. The artist is only 24, but she understands layers of meaning in a way many older artists never grasp." "Rather like my son," Isabella said quietly. "He sees things I often miss, including, it seems, the beauty of unexpected connections." When they gathered around the dining table, a beautiful salvaged wood piece that Antonio had found at a Brooklyn antique shop, the atmosphere was warmer than Jessica had dared hope for. Young Isabella kept the conversation flowing with stories from her cases, while Maya and Daniel provided welcome outside perspective on Antonio and Jessica's relationship. "The first time I saw them together," Maya was saying, "I didn't even notice the age difference. I just saw two people who couldn't take their eyes off each other, who finished each other's sentences about art and technology and life." "They make me believe in love again," Daniel added. "After my divorce, I thought that kind of connection was just a myth, but watching them navigate all the challenges they've faced, still standing strong together, it's inspiring." "Speaking of challenges," young Isabella spoke up, her voice carrying clearly, "I have something to say." She stood, raising her wine glass. "When Uncle James died, none of you understood Jessica's pain. You sent flowers and condolence cards, but you didn't really see her. Now that she's found happiness again, some of you wanted to deny her that too. Shame on all of you." "Isabella," her aunt warned, but the young woman continued. "No, this needs to be said. Love isn't about age or society's expectations. It's about connection, about finding someone who makes you better, who challenges you to grow. Antonio and Jessica have that. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with them can see it. So maybe instead of judging, we should be celebrating." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Then, surprisingly, it was Fernando who spoke. "She's right." All eyes turned to Antonio's father, who had barely spoken all evening. "I've spent my life following rules. Society's rules, family rules, business rules. And what has it gotten me? A son who barely spoke to me for years because I couldn't accept his choices. A family divided by prejudices we're too proud to admit are meaningless." He raised his glass. "To Antonio and Jessica, for having the courage to choose love over convention." The toast was echoed around the table, even Isabella Sr. joining in with what looked suspiciously like tears in her eyes. After dinner, as people broke into smaller groups around the apartment, Jessica found herself on the balcony with Valentina and young Isabella, watching the city lights twinkle against the darkening sky. "Thank you," she said quietly, "both of you, for being allies when we needed them most." "Thank you for loving my brother," Valentina replied, "for making him happier than I've ever seen him, for showing me that my own prejudices were limiting my understanding of love. For showing all of us," young Isabella added. "You two aren't just a couple, you're a revolution, a quiet one maybe, but important. You're showing people that love doesn't have to fit in predetermined boxes." Inside, they could hear laughter as Antonio apparently lost spectacularly at charades, his father actually chuckling at his dramatic performance. Isabella Sr.'s voice carried hints of warmth as she debated art with Maya, while Daniel and Fernando found common ground discussing technology's impact on law practice. "I think," Jessica said thoughtfully, "we're all finding allies in unexpected places." The evening wound down naturally, with hugs that felt genuine and promises to do this again that actually seemed sincere. Isabella Sr. surprised everyone by kissing Jessica's cheek and whispering, "You've given me back my son. Thank you." After the last guest had left, Antonio and Jessica stood in their kitchen, loading the dishwasher together in comfortable silence. "That went better than I expected," Jessica finally said. "Much better." Antonio smiled. "Though I think young Isabella's speech was the turning point. She's always been the conscience of the family." "We have good allies," Jessica agreed. "Maya, Daniel, both Isabella's, and now Valentina. Even your parents seem to be coming around." "We do," Antonio pulled her close. "But you know what? Even if we didn't, even if everyone still disapproved, I'd still choose you. Every time." Jessica kissed him softly. "I know. That's why everyone's finally accepting us, because they can see that this isn't a phase or a scandal or a crisis. It's just love, pure and simple." Outside, the city continued its endless dance of lights and shadows, but inside their apartment, in the aftermath of a dinner that had begun to heal old wounds, two people who had dared to love against the odds held each other close, grateful for the allies who had helped them prove that love knows no boundaries, not of age, not of family expectations, and certainly not of society's narrow definitions of what's acceptable. They had found their allies, yes, but more importantly, they had shown others that sometimes the bravest act of all is simply loving honestly, openly, and without apology. Chapter 9. The viral video. The evening had started simply enough at Pho 87, their favorite Vietnamese restaurant in the East Village. Jessica and Antonio were sharing a bowl of pho, talking about their day, when they noticed a young woman at the next table filming them surreptitiously. This wasn't unusual anymore. They'd grown accustomed to the occasional photo or video since their relationship became public. But Ashley Chen wasn't just another curious onlooker. At 24, she'd built a following of 3 million across platforms with her series Real Love Stories, which challenged societal norms around relationships. Her confrontational style had earned her both criticism and praise, but her ability to find genuine moments in stage confrontations had made her a rising star in social media. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Ashley said, approaching their table with her camera obviously recording, "but aren't you the couple everyone's talking about? The gallery owner and the tech guy?" Her tone was deliberately provocative, playing to her audience's expectations. "How does it feel to be a cougar?" she pressed when they didn't immediately respond. "Are you just with her for her money? Don't you think it's creepy, the age difference?" Antonio started to rise, protective instinct kicking in, but Jessica's hand on his arm stopped him. She'd seen something in Ashley's eyes, a genuine curiosity beneath the confrontational facade. "What's your real question, Ashley?" Jessica asked quietly, surprising the young influencer by using her name. She hadn't introduced herself yet. What do you mean?" "Behind those provocative questions, what do you really want to know?" "Because I don't think you're actually interested in tired stereotypes about cougars and gold diggers." The camera kept rolling, but something shifted in Ashley's demeanor. She pulled up a chair, her practiced persona falling away. "How do you do it?" she asked, her voice softer now. "How do you handle everyone's judgment?" "My channel is about challenging relationship norms, but the hate I get, just for discussing unconventional couples, is overwhelming. You're actually living it." Jessica smiled, understanding dawning. "You want the real story, not the sensational version?" Ashley nodded, her camera still recording but forgotten now. "I lost my first husband 3 weeks after our wedding," Jessica began, her voice carrying quiet strength. "I was younger then than Antonio is now. For years I thought that was it. My one chance at love, gone in a moment on a rainy morning. I built a successful gallery, made a name for myself in the art world, created a life I was proud of, but it was a life without partnership, without that special kind of joy that comes from sharing your days with someone who truly sees you. By now, other diners were listening too, drawn in by the authenticity in Jessica's voice. Then one evening, this brilliant young man walked into my gallery just before closing. He didn't see my age, he saw my passion for art, my understanding of how creativity shapes human experience. We talked for hours about memory and perception, about how art helps us understand ourselves. Antonio squeezed her hand, his eyes never leaving her face. Did we worry about the age difference? Of course. Did we know people would judge us? Absolutely. But here's what you need to understand, Ashley. Love doesn't check ID cards. It doesn't consult society's rulebook. It simply is. Ashley had completely abandoned her confrontational persona. But how do you deal with all the criticism, the judgment? With truth. Antonio spoke up. The truth is, I've never been happier, never been more myself than I am with Jessica. The truth is, age is just a number. But connection, real, deep, soul-level connection, that's rare at any age. The truth is, Jessica added, every person who judges us is really judging themselves. They're revealing their own fears about aging, about convention, about what love should look like versus what it actually is. Ashley uploaded the unedited video that night with a simple caption, "This changed how I see love." Within hours, it exploded. The video spread across platforms with unprecedented speed, but what made it truly remarkable was how it sparked conversations. Comment sections, usually breeding grounds for negativity, filled with stories of unconventional love. At Heartful Hope, my grandmother found love at 82 with a 60-year-old neighbor. We all judged them. After watching this, I called her to apologize. Love has no age. A truth seeker. As a relationship therapist, I've seen countless couples let society's expectations kill their chance at happiness. This couple articulates why that's such a tragedy. Love is love. Real Talk 2, 1025. The way he looks at her when she's speaking, that's not about age, that's about soul recognition, relationship goals. Major media outlets picked up the story, but not for its shock value. Instead, they focused on the deeper themes Jessica and Antonio had articulated. The Today Show requested an interview, but not for their usual relationship segment. They wanted to discuss ageism in love and society's evolving understanding of compatibility. Ashley's follow-up video, interviewing other age-gap couples inspired to share their stories, went viral too. The movement was growing, shifting from sensation to substance. Even critics found themselves challenged by the authenticity of the original video. Social media analysts noted that negative comments dropped significantly when faced with the genuine emotion and thoughtful articulation Jessica and Antonio displayed. One evening, about a week after the video went viral, they sat on their balcony reviewing the latest developments on Jessica's tablet. Time magazine wants to do a feature, she mentioned. Not about us specifically. They want to explore how social media is changing society's views on love and relationships. They're calling it Love Without Limits, How Digital Culture is Rewriting Romance. And Ellen's producers called again, Antonio added. They want us to meet Ashley on the show, talk about how a confrontational moment turned into a movement. Jessica set down her tablet. Are we becoming just another viral sensation? Will people see past the surface to what really matters? I think they already are, Antonio replied, showing her his phone. It displayed an email from a 70-year-old professor who had found love with a younger colleague, but had been afraid to acknowledge it publicly. We're not going viral because we're shocking. We're going viral because we're giving people permission to be authentic. Below their balcony, a group of young women recognized them, pointing and smiling. Instead of taking photos, they called up, Thank you for being brave." The sincerity in their voices was unmistakable. The video had changed things, but not in the way most viral content did. Instead of 15 minutes of fame, it had sparked a genuine dialogue about love, age, and authenticity. It had turned their private journey into a public conversation about what really matters in relationships. Even Ashley had been transformed by the experience. Her content shifted from confrontational to conversational, focusing on real stories of love in all its forms. She'd found her true voice as a storyteller, inspired by a moment of unexpected authenticity in a Vietnamese restaurant. Their phones buzzed. Another notification about Ashley's latest video series, Love Beyond Labels, featuring couples who had found happiness by ignoring society's rules. The revolution they had inadvertently started was growing, spreading, touching hearts and changing minds one story at a time. Jessica and Antonio watched the city lights twinkle, their hands intertwined, their hearts beating in sync. They had become more than just a couple. They had become a catalyst for change, helping others understand that love transcends all boundaries, including time itself. The viral video hadn't just captured a moment, it had captured a truth about love that resonated across generations, cultures, and platforms. In doing so, it had helped create a world where love stories didn't need to follow conventional scripts to be celebrated. And really, wasn't that the most viral thing of all? The simple, powerful truth that love knows no boundaries. Chapter 10. The Breaking Point. The weight of public attention had been building for weeks. Since the viral video, Jessica and Antonio's relationship had become a cultural touchpoint, dissected and analyzed across social media platforms, talk shows, and think pieces. While much of the attention was positive, the constant scrutiny was taking its toll. Jessica stood in their bedroom, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. She'd lost weight in the past month, the stress of constant public appearances etching itself into her face. Today's outfit, a sophisticated black pantsuit for yet another television interview, felt like armor rather than clothing. "Ready?" Antonio called from the living room. "The car will be here in 10 minutes. "Almost," she replied, though in truth she didn't feel ready at all. The morning's email had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Another think piece, this one particularly vicious, suggesting she was stealing Antonio's best years, denying him the chance at a normal family life. The same thoughts that had been haunting her for days crystallized. Was she being selfish? Was she really doing what was best for Antonio? When she emerged from the bedroom, Antonio was on the phone with his assistant discussing the day's schedule. He looked tired too, she noticed. The board meeting yesterday had run long, filled with pointed questions about how their public profile was affecting company image. "Car's here," he said after hanging up. "You okay?" "You look pale." "I'm fine," she lied. "Just tired." The drive to the television studio was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. The city passed by in a blur of early winter grey, Christmas decorations already appearing in store windows, though Thanksgiving had barely passed. The interview itself was a blur of familiar questions. How did they meet? How do they handle the age difference? What do their families think? They answered on autopilot, their responses well rehearsed by now, but something felt off, mechanical, as if they were playing roles rather than sharing their truth. Back home that evening, Jessica sat at their dining table staring at her untouched dinner. Antonio was in his home office, dealing with yet another crisis at work. Something about investors being nervous about his public image. The breaking point came suddenly, though in retrospect it had been building for days. "I can't watch them destroy you," Jessica said quietly when Antonio finally emerged from his office. He stopped in the doorway. "What?" "Your career, your reputation, your future. I'm watching it all slip away because of me." She stood, moving to the window to avoid his gaze. The board is right to be concerned. Your investors are right to be nervous. I'm a liability. Jessica, stop. Antonio moved toward her, but she held up a hand to keep him back. No, let me finish. I've been selfish, Antonio. I've been so caught up in our happiness that I ignored what this relationship is costing you. Your sister barely speaks to you. Your business partners doubt your judgment. Half the internet thinks you're having some kind of crisis, and the other half thinks I'm manipulating you. Since when do you care what the internet thinks? His voice held an edge of anger now. This isn't like you, Jessica. Where is this coming from? She finally turned to face him, tears threatening. From watching you defend me every single day, from seeing the strain in your face every time you have to explain our relationship to another skeptic, from realizing that I'm asking you to sacrifice too much. You're not asking me to sacrifice anything, Antonio said fiercely. Every choice I've made has been my own. Has it? Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. Or have you been so busy proving everyone wrong that you haven't let yourself consider if they might be right? Right about what? About you deserving a normal life, children, a family, a future that isn't complicated by a partner 20 years older than society thinks is acceptable. Antonio ran his hands through his hair in frustration. I don't want a normal life. I want you, United States, this life we're building together. But for how long? The question that had been haunting her finally escaped. In 10 years, 20, when the age difference becomes even more pronounced, when you're in your prime and I'm... Stop it! Antonio's voice cracked. Just stop! You're trying to make decisions for both of us. And that's not fair. You don't get to decide what I deserve or what will make me happy. I'm trying to protect you. No, he said sharply. You're trying to protect yourself. You're scared, so you're pushing me away before life can do it for you. But that's not how love works, Jessica. Real love means facing the fear together. She moved away from him, gathering her coat and bag. I need some air, some time to think. Jessica, please. The pain in his voice nearly broke her resolve. Don't do this. Don't let them win. I can't watch them destroy you, she repeated, heading for the door. I love you too much for that. This will destroy me more than any criticism ever could, he called after her. But she was already closing the door behind her. The winter air hit her like a physical blow as she stepped onto the street. Without conscious thought, her feet carried her toward Washington Square Park. The arch loomed ahead, lit against the night sky, a monument to triumph that felt like mockery now. She found a bench and sat, watching late-night dog walkers and students hurrying through the park. Her phone buzzed repeatedly. Antonio, no doubt, then Maya, then young Isabella. She ignored them all. The truth was, she'd been building to this moment for weeks. Every negative comment, every concerned glance, every well-meaning friend suggesting she was being unfair to Antonio, it had all accumulated like snow on a roof, getting heavier and heavier until something had to give. Back in their apartment, Antonio stood at the window, watching the park where he knew she'd gone. His own phone buzzed. Valentina, surprisingly. Don't let her do this, his sister said when he answered. Don't let her sacrifice your happiness because she thinks it's the right thing to do. How did you... Maya called me. She's worried. We all are. This isn't about age anymore, Antonio. It's about fear. Jessica's afraid of hurting you, of holding you back, of becoming a burden. She needs you to prove her wrong. In the park, Jessica wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling. A young couple walked past, hand in hand, laughing about something private. They reminded her of her early days with Antonio, before the world had intruded with its judgments and expectations. I can't watch them destroy you. The words echoed in her mind, but now they felt hollow. Who was really doing the destroying here? The critics, the skeptics, or her own fears, her own insecurities about whether she deserved this happiness. Her phone buzzed again. A text from young Isabella. Love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing. Every day, choose him again, Jessica. Choose happiness. The park had emptied now, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The arch still loomed, but now it seemed less like mockery and more like a challenge. How many couples had stood beneath it over the years, facing their own fears, their own doubts? "I'm trying to protect you." Her words to Antonio came back to her, and suddenly she saw them for what they were. Not protection, but fear disguised as nobility. She wasn't protecting him, she was protecting herself from the possibility of future pain by inflicting certain pain now. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had reached her breaking point, yes, but perhaps breaking points weren't always about ending things. Sometimes they were about breaking through fear, through doubt, through the walls we build around our own hearts. Her phone buzzed one final time, a simple text from Antonio. "Come home, please, we'll face it together." The walk back to their apartment felt both endless and too short. Each step was a choice to be brave, to trust love more than fear, to believe that what they had built was stronger than any criticism could ever be. When she opened their door, Antonio was waiting. Without words, he pulled her into his arms, and she felt the tension of the past weeks begin to dissolve. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his chest. "I got scared." "I know." His arms tightened around her. "But we don't have to face the fear alone. That's the whole point of us. We do it together." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet of their home. Outside, the city continued its endless dance of light and shadow, but inside, something had shifted. They had reached their breaking point and chosen to break through rather than break apart. The criticism wouldn't stop. The challenges wouldn't disappear. But they had faced their darkest fear, the fear of their love not being enough, and found it wanting. What they had was stronger than doubt, bigger than fear, more powerful than any external judgment. "I choose you," Jessica said softly, "today and every day." "And I choose you," Antonio replied. "Age, criticism, fear, none of it matters. What matters is us together." The breaking point had come, but instead of ending their story, it had made it stronger. Sometimes they realized you have to reach the edge of breaking to discover just how unbreakable love can be. Chapter 11. The Speech. The New York Society for Modern Relationships had chosen an appropriately modern venue for their annual forum, the newly renovated Whitney Museum's top floor, with its sweeping views of the Manhattan skyline. The topic this year was Love Without Limits, Challenging Traditional Relationship Paradigms, and Jessica had been invited as the keynote speaker. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the December sunset paint the city in shades of gold and rose. The event would begin in an hour, and already the space was filling with academics, relationship experts, social commentators, and media personalities. Somewhere in the crowd, Antonio was chatting with guests, his natural charm helping to ease any lingering awkwardness about their presence. "Are you ready?" Maya appeared at her elbow, clipboard in hand. As always, she had appointed herself Jessica's unofficial guardian, managing the logistics of their increasingly public life with fierce dedication. "As ready as I'll ever be," Jessica replied, smoothing her silver hair. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a midnight blue evening gown that managed to be both elegant and contemporary, much like the message she hoped to convey. The weeks since their near breaking point had been transformative. Instead of hiding from the attention, they had decided to use it purposefully, to turn their story into something that might help others facing similar judgments. This speech was part of that decision. "The panel discussion is starting," Maya noted. "You're on in 45 minutes. Jessica nodded, moving to take her seat in the audience. The panel, consisting of a relationship therapist, a sociologist, and a popular dating coach, was discussing the evolution of romantic relationships in the modern age. Their conversation was academic, theoretical, filled with statistics and sociological terms. The data shows increasing acceptance of age gap relationships, the sociologist was saying, particularly when the older partner is male. However, we still see significant stigma when the age difference is reversed, especially with a significant gap. It's about power dynamics, the dating coach added. Society is comfortable with older men having power in relationships, but struggles with older women in the same position. Jessica felt Antonio's hand find hers in the dimness. They had heard it all before, the analysis, the theorizing, the attempts to categorize and explain their love in sociological terms. But love, real love, defied such neat categorization. Finally, it was time. The moderator introduced Jessica to polite applause, though she could feel the undercurrent of curiosity in the room. She took her place at the podium, looking out over the sea of faces, some skeptical, some supportive, all waiting to hear what she would say. Her voice shook at first, but grew stronger with each word. I lost my husband when I was younger than Antonio is now. I spent decades believing my chance at love was over, that loneliness was my destiny. Then I met someone who saw me, not my age, not my past, but me. You call it inappropriate, I call it a miracle. You say I'm too old for him. I say love doesn't check ID cards. She paused, letting her words sink in. Every single person who has judged us has their own fear of aging, their own prejudices about what love should look like. But love, real love, it doesn't fit your rules. It never has. The room was completely silent now, every face turned toward her. I've heard all your theories about power dynamics and sociological trends. I've read your studies about age gaps and relationship success rates. But here's what your studies don't measure: the way your heart recognizes its match, regardless of the numbers. The way love can surprise you when you least expect it, arriving in a package society tells you to reject. She could see Antonio in the audience, his eyes never leaving her face. We've faced judgment from every quarter. Family, friends, colleagues, strangers on the internet. We've been analyzed, criticized, theorized about. People have tried to reduce our love to statistics, to sociological phenomena, to psychological patterns. But love isn't a pattern. It's not a statistic. It's not a theory. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. Love is waking up next to someone who makes your world brighter just by existing. It's finding a person who challenges you to grow, who sees past your defenses to who you really are. It's choosing each other every day, despite the whispers and stares and well-meaning concerns. In the audience, she could see tears on some faces, recognition on others. I've been told I'm selfish for taking Antonio's youth, but love isn't about taking, it's about giving. Giving support, giving understanding, giving the freedom to be fully yourself. Age doesn't determine your capacity to give or receive love. Society's expectations don't get to dictate where and how we find happiness. She stepped away from the podium, moving to the edge of the stage to speak more directly to her audience. Some of you are here to study relationships like ours, to fit us into your academic frameworks. Some are here because you're facing similar judgments in your own lives. Some are here out of simple curiosity. But all of you are here because, deep down, you know that love is changing. The old rules are crumbling. The boundaries we once thought were fixed are proving to be arbitrary. Jessica's eyes found Regina Blackwood in the crowd. Her former friend had come, after all. To those who judge us, who think they know better than we do what will make us happy, I say this: your judgment says more about your fears than our love. Every time you criticize a relationship that doesn't fit your expectations, You're revealing your own limitations, your own inability to imagine happiness outside the boxes society has built. She could see Regina dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I stand here today not to defend our love. It needs no defense, but to challenge you. Challenge your assumptions about what love should look like. Challenge your beliefs about who deserves happiness and when. Challenge the very notion that love can be contained by rules or expectations or societal norms. Her voice softened, becoming more intimate, because here's the truth. The simple, powerful truth that all your studies and theories miss. Love doesn't care about your rules. It doesn't care about your comfort zones. It doesn't care about the numbers on our birth certificates. Love cares only about the connection between souls, about the way two people can make each other's lives richer, fuller, more meaningful. By now, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the academics had set aside their notepads, caught up in the raw honesty of her words. So judge us if you must. Write your papers and conduct your studies. But know this, while you're analyzing us, we're living. While you're theorizing about age gaps and power dynamics, we're loving. While you're wondering what makes our relationship work, we're simply being happy. She paused, letting her gaze sweep the room one final time. Because that's what love is in the end. Not a theory to be studied, not a phenomenon to be analyzed, but a simple, profound truth. When two people find each other, when they recognize in each other the capacity for joy and growth and understanding, nothing else matters. Not age, not society's expectations, not other people's comfort levels. Nothing but the choice to love, freely and fully, with all that we are. The silence that followed her final words lasted only a moment before the room erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, some wiping tears, others nodding in emphatic agreement. Through the crowd, she could see Antonio making his way toward the stage, his own eyes bright with emotion. Regina Blackwood reached her first, wrapping her in a tearful embrace. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I was wrong, so wrong." Others followed, academics wanting to talk, couples sharing their own stories, journalists requesting interviews. But Jessica had eyes only for Antonio, who had finally reached her side. "That," he said softly, taking her hand, "was beautiful and true, every word." The evening continued with more panels, more discussions, more theoretical frameworks being proposed and debated. But something had shifted in the room. The academic distance had been replaced by something more personal, more real. Jessica's speech had transformed the conversation from analysis to understanding, from theory to truth. Later that night, as they walked home through the winter streets, Antonio pulled her close. "You know what I loved most about your speech?" he asked. "What?" "That you didn't just talk about us. You talked about love itself, its power to surprise us, to challenge us, to make us more than we thought we could be." Jessica smiled, remembering the faces in the crowd, the tears, the recognition. "Maybe that's what we're really doing here," she said thoughtfully. "Not just living our love story, but helping others see that love stories don't have to follow a script, they just have to be true." Above them, the December sky was clear and star-filled, as if the universe itself was bearing witness to this moment of truth, this declaration of love's boundless nature. They had faced judgment and emerged stronger. They had reached their breaking point and chosen to break through instead of break apart. And now, with Jessica's words still echoing in the hearts of all who had heard them, they had helped others understand that love, real love, knows no boundaries. It simply is, in all its beautiful, unexpected, rule-breaking glory. Chapter 12. Love Prevails. The morning of their wedding dawned crisp and clear, the kind of winter day that made Manhattan feel like a snow globe waiting to be shaken. Jessica stood at the window of her old apartment, where she'd insisted on spending the night in accordance with tradition, though she and Antonio had been living together for months. Maya was bustling around, arranging the elegant white bouquet of calla lilies and roses, while young Isabella helped adjust Jessica's dress, a custom-designed gown in soft ivory that managed to be both timeless and contemporary. The dress had been a gift from Isabella Sr., a peace offering that meant more than any words could express. "You look absolutely beautiful," young Isabella said softly, stepping back to admire the effect. The dress flowed like liquid silk, its subtle beading catching the morning light. Jessica's silver hair had been styled in elegant waves, and around her neck lay a delicate diamond pendant, Antonio's gift, delivered that morning with a note that had made her cry, "To my timeless love, who taught me that the heart knows no numbers." At second canvas, transformed for the occasion into an ethereal wedding venue, Antonio stood with Daniel, adjusting his bow tie for the 100th time. The gallery space had been filled with thousands of white flowers, their scent mingling with the artwork that told the story of their relationship, including the piece Jessica had been discussing the night they met. "Nervous?" Daniel asked, handing him a glass of scotch. "Not about marrying her," Antonio replied. "Never about that. Just hoping everything is perfect for her." The gallery began filling with guests, a carefully curated mixture of family, friends, and those who had supported them through their journey. Valentina arrived early, helping to arrange the final details, with an enthusiasm that would have seemed impossible months ago. Rosa had insisted on catering, turning down all offers of payment with her usual "family doesn't pay" declaration. Theodore Hawthorne arrived with other board members, their presence a testament to how perceptions had changed. Even Regina Blackwood was there, having become one of their strongest advocates after Jessica's speech at the Whitney. When Jessica arrived, escorted by her closest friend from college, the gathered crowd fell silent in appreciation. But Antonio didn't notice anyone else. His eyes were fixed on his bride, seeing not the age that had once concerned so many, but the radiant soul of the woman who had changed his life. Isabella Sr., who had come to adjust Jessica's veil with tears in her eyes, whispered, "Thank you for teaching me that love is bigger than my prejudices." The ceremony itself was both intimate and profound. They had written their own vows, speaking not of forever. They both knew too well how fragile that promise could be, but of now, of choosing each other every day despite the world's judgment. Jessica's voice shook with emotion as she spoke. "Antonio, when you walked into my gallery that evening, you didn't just enter a space, you entered my heart. You saw past the numbers that others couldn't see beyond, straight to my soul. You taught me that love doesn't have an expiration date, that happiness doesn't follow society's schedule. I promise to love you, not with the caution of age, but with the wisdom of experience and the passion of a heart, made young again by your love." Antonio's response brought tears to every eye. "Jessica, you didn't just give me love, you gave me courage. Courage to defy expectations, to choose happiness over convention, to live truth instead of rules. Everyone said you were too old for me, but they didn't understand that souls don't age. They didn't understand that when hearts recognize each other, time becomes meaningless. I promise to love you not with the impulsiveness of youth, but with the certainty of a heart that knows exactly what it wants." As they faced their guests, Antonio spoke words that would later be shared thousands of times online. "The biggest risk in life isn't loving someone different from society's expectations. It's letting those expectations stop you from loving at all." The reception that followed was a celebration not just of their love, but of love's power to transform. Young couples sought their advice. Older ones shared their own stories of defying convention. Even the most skeptical relatives had to admit there was something magical about the way Jessica and Antonio looked at each other. Maya's toast captured the essence of their journey. "I've watched them face judgment with grace, criticism with dignity, and doubt with unwavering faith in each other. They didn't just fall in love, They chose love, again and again, even when it would have been easier to give in to society's pressure. They showed us that love isn't about fitting into someone else's definition of normal. It's about having the courage to write your own definition. As the evening wore on, Jessica and Antonio slipped away to the gallery's rooftop garden. Above them, stars pierced the winter sky, and below, the city sparkled like a reflection of the heavens. "Happy?" Antonio asked, pulling her close. "Beyond words," Jessica replied, "though I still can't quite believe how much has changed. A year ago, I thought I was too old for this kind of happiness. And now? Now I know that age is just a number, but love is infinite." They danced slowly under the stars, their movements perfectly synchronized, as if their bodies had been designed to fit together. From below came the sounds of celebration, of joy, of acceptance hard won, but finally, fully given. "You know what makes me happiest," Antonio murmured against her hair. "Not just that we found each other, but that our love has helped others find the courage to follow their hearts." It was true. Their story had become a catalyst for change, inspiring others to challenge society's limitations on love. They had received countless letters from couples who had found the courage to be together after hearing about them, from families who had learned to set aside their prejudices, from individuals who had stopped letting age determine their chances at happiness. As midnight approached, they rejoined their guests for the final celebrations. The gallery, filled with art and flowers and love, had never looked more beautiful. Isabella Sr. danced with her younger namesake, while Valentina and Maya shared conspiratorial laughs. Rosa presided over the dessert table like a queen, insisting everyone try everything. When it was time to leave, their guests formed an aisle, holding small lights that turned the space into a pathway of stars. Jessica and Antonio walked through this constellation of love and support, each light representing a person who had moved from judgment to acceptance, from doubt to celebration. Just before they reached the door, Jessica turned back to their gathered loved ones and spoke from her heart. "Thank you for learning to see with your hearts instead of your eyes. Thank you for proving that love can change minds, open hearts, and bridge any gap. Most of all, thank you for being part of our story, a story that proves love knows no boundaries, no limitations, no rules except those of the heart." As they stepped into their future together, the winter night wrapped around them like a blessing. They had done more than find love. They had shown the world that love, real love, transcends all boundaries. Their story would continue to inspire, to challenge, to change perceptions. But in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the simple, profound truth they had proven, that love, when it's real, knows no age, no limits, no constraints. It simply is in all its beautiful, boundless glory. And really, what could be more perfect than that? Subscribe if you loved.